Welcome back to Dark Deeds and Conspiracy Podcast, the show where facts meet the fringe. I'm Alex.
And I'm Jordan. And today, we're diving into one of the most persistent and honestly wild conspiracy theories out there. Did the CIA assassinate Bob Marley?
Now, on paper, Marley died of cancer. That's the official story. A rare form of melanoma that started in his toe and spread over the course of a few years.
But dig a little deeper, and things start to seal off. I mean, we're talking about a man who was politically powerful, globally beloved, and performing in a country caught in the middle of Cold War influence. And then, boom, he dies young under strange circumstances.
There's a difference between strange and sinister, but we'll get into it. In this episode, we'll break down the official timeline of Marley's illness, the violent political climate of the 1970s Jamaica, and the evidence, if any, that intelligence agencies might have wanted him gone.
And of course, we'll talk about that supposed CIA confession, the boot with the copper wire, and the rumors that never really died.
So, was it just cancer or something much darker? Let's start from the beginning. All right, let's lay the groundwork. The official story goes like this. In 1977, Bob Marley was playing football, that is soccer, with his friends in London when he injured his toe. At first, it seemed minor, but when the injury didn't heal, doctors took a closer look and found it wasn't a bruise or a fracture, it was cancer.
Specifically, a rare and aggressive form called acral lentiginous melanoma. It typically shows up in the palms, soles, or under the nails, areas where people don't usually think to check. And it's more common in people with darker skin, which might explain why it went unnoticed for a while.
Doctors recommended amputation of the toe, but Marley refused. He cited his Rastafarian beliefs, which see the body as sacred and not to be cut unless absolutely necessary. Instead, he had a less invasive surgery to remove the nail and tissue.
There, things seemed okay. For a while, he kept touring, he kept making music, but by 1980, during the US leg of his tour, he collapsed while jogging in Central Park. That's when it was discovered that the cancer had spread to his brain, lungs, and liver.
His final concert was in Pittsburgh that September. After that, his health declined rapidly. He sought treatment in Germany, some say as a last resort, but it didn't work. He died in May 1981 at just 36 years old.
That's the medical version. But it leaves out a lot, doesn't it? Like how sudden the cancer was, how it went from a stubbed toe to fatal metastasis in less than 4 years, or how he was at the height of his influence right when certain governments had every reason to silence him.
I mean, yeah, it was tragic, but aggressive cancers like that do exist. Sometimes they aren't caught until it's too late. And Marley chose to delay the most extreme treatment. That doesn't mean someone killed him.
Fair. But let's look at the bigger picture. Because Bob Marley wasn't just a reggae singer, he was a political force in a deeply unstable Jamaica. And if you believe the theory, that might have made him a target. To understand why someone might want Bob Marley dead, we need to talk about Jamaica in the 1970s. This wasn't just beach resorts and good vibes. The country was in political chaos, basically a proxy battlefield in the Cold War.
Right. You had two major political parties, the PNP, led by Michael Manley, and the JLP, led by Edward Seaga. Manley leaned left, even openly aligning himself with the Fidel Castro. That made the US nervous. Very nervous.
And Marley? He was technically apolitical. He didn't officially endorse either side, but he was influential. He was seen as a voice for the people, especially the poor and marginalized. And that made him dangerous, not just in Jamaica, but globally.
That came to a head in 1976 with the Smile Jamaica concert. The PNP government organized it, supposedly to ease political tensions. Marley agreed to perform, but many interpreted it as a sign of unofficial endorsement of Manley.
On just 2 days before the concert, gunmen stormed Bob Marley's home and shot him, his wife Rita, and his manager. All three survived, but barely. And Marley still performed at that concert with a bullet lodged in his arm.
Yeah, that's legend level resilience. But here's where things get messy. The shooters were allegedly linked to gang members affiliated with JLP, the opposition party, which had quiet but well documented ties to the CIA.
Exactly. According to declassified CIA documents, the US was actively funding and arming elements of the JLP as a counterbalance to Manley's socialist leanings. So if the JLP saw Marley as a threat and they were backed by the CIA, it's not that hard to draw a line.
Hold up, though. Drawing a line isn't the same as proving one. Yes, the CIA meddled. Yes, there was violence. But that doesn't mean they orchestrated Bob Marley's death years later through cancer.
Fair. But if someone survives a politically motivated shooting in a US backed turf war and then suddenly dies of a rare cancer not long after, it raises questions.
It does. But those questions need answers. And that's where things start to spiral. So let's get into the actual conspiracy theories: the poison boot, the mysterious CIA confession, and whether there's any truth beneath the smoke.
Okay, so let's talk about the weird stuff. This is where the official narrative starts to fray, where people who don't buy the cancer story point to darker possibilities.
I already feel my blood pressure rising.
Just hear me out. The main theory, the one that's been circulating for decades, says that Bob Marley was intentionally infected with cancer. And the most specific version of that theory involves a boot.
Right. This is the story where someone gives Marley a pair of boots, and when he tries them on, a copper wire inside the toe allegedly pricks his skin. That's supposedly how the cancer was introduced?
Exactly. The theory claims that the wire was coated in some sort of radioactive or carcinogenic substance, enough to trigger the melanoma. Now, this story traces back to Carl Colby, the son of former CIA Director William Colby. He was reportedly posing as a journalist or photographer and gifted Marley those boots.
And just to be clear, there's no public documentation, no photos, no witnesses, not even Marley's friends, who ever confirmed that this incident happened. The whole thing hinges on hearsay and third party retellings.
True, but the Colby family was involved with covert ops, and Carl was known to be in Jamaica in that era. He even worked on documentaries later about political violence in the Caribbean. The theory gained momentum because it tied together real names with suspicious timing.
Still, logistically, it doesn't hold up. Cancer doesn't work like that. You don't get pricked by a wire and wake up with stage 4 melanoma. It's not a James Bond movie.
Not exactly, but there are toxins like polonium used in the poisoning of Russian dissident Alexander Litvinenko that can cause fatal illness over time. Slow acting poisons that mimic disease. If a government did want to make a death look natural, that's how they'd do it.
Okay, now we're talking about radioisotopes and covert bioweapons. There's no autopsy suggesting Marley was poisoned, no trace elements reported. The German clinic that treated him was alternative but not criminal. That's a huge assumption based on zero physical evidence.
Sure, but if you're orchestrating an assassination, you don't leave evidence behind. That's the point. The CIA has a long history of experimenting with biological agents, from MK Ultra to Project MK Naomi. They were obsessed with undetectable poisons, one that can mimic a heart attack or illness.
Right, but those programs were mostly about control and interrogation, not celebrity assassinations. There's still a leap from the CIA did sketchy stuff to they gave Bob Marley cancer in his shoes.
Fine. Then what about the so called deathbed confession? In 2010, a man called Bill Oxley, allegedly a former CIA agent, claimed on his deathbed that he personally helped assassinate Bob Marley, along with 17 others, on behalf of the agency.
Yeah, and that story came from a fake news site. It was never corroborated. There's no evidence Oxley even existed in any CIA roster. It reads like fan fiction.
Well, that's part of the challenge, right? We know intelligence work is designed to leave no trails. So, how do you prove a cover up with no paper trail?
Or maybe the lack of evidence just means there's no conspiracy. Sometimes a tragic death is just a tragic death.
But isn't it weird that someone as politically powerful, as universally loved, as young as Bob Marley died, right when his influence was peaking? That's what keeps people asking.
It's not weird, it's just devastating. But rare cancers do happen. And Marley rejected the most effective treatment because of his beliefs. That's not a government plot, that's a man making a choice.
Maybe, or maybe he knew something. Maybe he felt watched or pressured or backed into a corner. After all, he was shot and then sang a peace song with a bullet still in him. The man was clearly under fire, literally and metaphorically.
Okay, but if you're going to accuse the CIA of murder, you need more than a suspicious vibe and a rumor about boots. That's all I'm saying.
And I'm saying the suspicious vibe is enough to ask more questions. Maybe we don't have answers, but that doesn't mean we stop digging. Okay, so a moment of truth. After all the theories, the historical context, the conflicting evidence, are we buying the idea that the CIA intentionally killed Bob Marley? Or is it just another conspiracy theory we can chalk up to coincidence?
If I'm being honest, Jordan, I'm still leaning towards the coincidence side of things. The fact is, Marley had an extremely rare form of cancer. And while I get that the timing is suspicious, it's also what makes cancer conspiracy theories so sticky. There's always this narrative of if it happened just like that, it must be something more.
But isn't it the timing that matters? Here's a guy who had enemies in powerful places, both in Jamaica and abroad. He was outspoken. He was a threat to certain people who didn't want his influence growing. And then, just when he's at the height of his power, he gets shot and diagnosed with a terminal illness. I mean, the pieces just fit, don't they?
Look, I get that it seems like a movie plot. It almost should be a movie plot. But when you pull back and think about it from a logical standpoint, it's not that simple. Marley had access to excellent doctors. He also rejected conventional treatment, maybe because of spiritual reasons, maybe because of personal beliefs. It's easy to point fingers at a conspiracy when someone as iconic as Marley dies young, but that doesn't always mean someone was behind it.
I get that. But there's this feeling, almost a gut instinct, that there's more to it. Think about how deeply the CIA's fingerprints are all over political assassinations and covert operations, especially in the 1970s. I mean, they didn't just target foreign governments, they were all in on shaping the cultural and political landscape, even within the US, when Bob Marley was directly in the crosshairs of that movement.
True, but let's not forget that Marley was, at his core, a messenger for peace. The same people who might have felt threatened by him were also the ones who saw how powerful his message was. And when a man like that dies, especially from a disease, there's a tendency to fill the void with stories. And these stories, though compelling, might not always be based on facts.
I see where you're coming from, but I think the ambiguity is what keeps people asking questions. Maybe there's no smoking gun. Maybe it will never get the concrete evidence we want. But there's too much about Marley's life and death that doesn't just add up to bad luck. The CIA didn't have to leave a paper trail. They didn't need to be that sloppy.
But they would have been sloppy to take out someone like Marley. He had the world's attention. The risk would have been huge. A man like that, he wasn't just a celebrity, he was a movement.
Right. But history has shown that the US government, especially during the Cold War, was willing to take massive risks. It wasn't always about being neat. It was about silencing voices that didn't fit the narrative they wanted. And Marley? He didn't fit their mold. He was too influential, too powerful.
So, what do we do with all this? Do we say that the CIA had a hand in his death? Or is this one of those cases where the conspiracy is just a comforting story to explain something too tragic, too random to accept?
I guess at the end of the day, we'll never really know. And that's what keeps this theory alive, right? It's not about the answer, it's about the questions. Bob Marley was a man who inspired millions. If the powers that be didn't like that, then maybe it's not so far fetched to think that they might have tried to stop him.
Or maybe it's just a tragic story of a man who lived hard and died young. Sometimes life is messier than any theory can explain.
But isn't it the messiness that makes this so fascinating? We might never have definitive proof, but we're left with the mystery. Now, for Marley, who lived his life surrounded by contradictions, maybe the questions will always be more important than the answers.
Fair enough. But for all the people out there who want to believe in this story, maybe that's the truth in itself. Marley's death is as complicated as the man he was.
Exactly. So, whether you're leaning towards the official story or you're convinced there's something more to the CIA connection, just know this: Bob Marley's legacy isn't defined by his death, it's the message he left behind. A message that, ironically, might be more relevant now than ever before.
And with that, we'll leave it to you, our listeners. Was Bob Marley's death a tragic coincidence or a political assassination? The lines between fact and fiction blur in these kinds of stories. And in the end, maybe that's where the real mystery lies.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We'll see you next time, where we'll dive into another mystery that might be stranger than fiction. Until then, keep questioning, keep searching for the truth. But before we wrap up today's episode, I think we need to take a step back and reflect on why this conversation even matters. Whether we lean towards the conspiracy or the official story, the truth is, Bob Marley's legacy goes far beyond any theories surrounding his death. He left behind a cultural and musical revolution.
Absolutely. And it's incredible how much he accomplished in such a short amount of time. I mean, this is a man who didn't just make music, he created anthems for social justice, freedom, and unity. His message was about love, but also about resistance. He stood for something bigger than himself, which is why we're still talking about him today.
Right. And no matter how his life ended, Marley's music transcended the borders of Jamaica. It touched people around the world. And even if his death remains mysterious, it doesn't change the fact that he became an icon, a voice of the oppressed, someone who changed how we think about freedom, unity, and even spirituality.
Exactly. The most important thing here is his influence. It's still felt today. Whether you're listening to One Love or Redemption Song, his words are still guiding us. His impact on music, culture, and activism can't be understated. We could spend all day debating the specifics of his death, but his life is what truly mattered. And that's the legacy he left behind.
For sure. And it's interesting, isn't it? When someone like Marley dies, especially when the circumstances are shrouded in mystery, his legend only grows. It's almost as if the conspiracy surrounding his death is just another chapter in the mythology that has come to define him.
It does seem fitting that someone who lives so loudly, so unapologetically, would have such an enduring story around his death. Maybe in the end, the unanswered questions are part of the allure. It keeps the conversation going.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Whether or not you believe in this conspiracy, Bob Marley's legacy is undeniable. He's a symbol of resilience, creativity, and the fight for justice. His music will live on, and his message will continue to inspire generations.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. We want to thank all of you for tuning in and joining us on this deep dive into the life, death, and legacy of Bob Marley. We hope we've sparked some questions and maybe even some new perspectives for you to consider.
Yes, thank you so much for listening. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Do you think the CIA had a hand in Bob Marley's death? Or is it just a conspiracy that's grown too wild? Do you have your own theories? Leave us a comment. We definitely want to hear from you.
And before you go, don't forget to subscribe and tune in next week. We've got a very exciting episode coming up, and it's definitely one you don't want to miss.
So until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep exploring the mysteries of the world around you. We'll see you in the next episode.